Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today as we present on peace building and the climate crisis. I'm Michelle, and I'm in the fundraising team here at Peace Direct, and I'm joined today by Shahzad, Ayesha, and Jayaa, all of whom have worked with Peace Direct's partner in Pakistan, the Chanan Development Association. And we're really thrilled to have you with us. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. I can see from the list of attendees, I know we can't see you today, but I can see that we've got some kind of familiar faces in the audience, and also that we've got some new supporters joining us, which is just really great to see. Before we get started, I don't want to take up too much time with housekeeping, but just to let you know that my colleague Oscar is going to be moderating the chat today. So if you have any questions, any queries or technical difficulties, please just pop them in the chat and he'll get back to you. Equally, we'll have time for a Q&A section, and there's a Q&A button on screen where you can submit your questions for Ayesha and Jayaa, and we'll get to that later. So yeah, please do use those functions as we go along. And also we are recording today as well, and we'll be able to share that recording with you later. So now that we can get into the webinar itself, I will just introduce CDA and our work with them. So this event is actually run as part of our current appeal, which is Peace Direct's first ever partner-led fundraising appeal. We're working with Chanan Development Association, our partner in Pakistan. They're a youth-led peace-building organization working with young people, young change makers across Pakistan. And this co-appeal is our first time working in this capacity, where all donations raised through the campaign will be shared equally between Peace Direct and CDA. So you may well have received, if you sign up to our mailing list, you may well have already received some emails about the co-appeal. If you've not heard about it yet, we will be posting some links to it in the chat so that you can explore that more and get to know some of the work that we've been doing with CDA on this appeal. And I'd like to hand over now to Shahzad, who I've been working very closely with on this appeal. Shahzad is the Executive Director at Chanan Development Association. And today, obviously, we're going to be focusing on the aspect of the work that is to do with climate crisis response. So I just want to hand over to Shahzad to speak a bit more about some of the work that CDA have been doing in this area. So Shahzad.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And it's really a pleasure for Chanan Development Association to partner with Peace Direct for this appeal. We're really excited that that we are able to have some conversation around young people's, and especially the grassroots CSOs, engagement in addressing the climate issues, and specifically the intersectionality of climate with peace building. This is a very important component. Just to share, the Chanan Development Association, we're working in Pakistan since 2006. We're a national youth organization. We're striving for meaningful participation and empowerment of young people. And one of the focus area that we work specifically in Pakistan is around strengthening youth-led civil society organizations. And as part of the strengthening youth-led civil society organizations, we specifically work on engaging and building capacities of grassroots youth organizations, grassroots women-led organizations, grassroots trans-led organizations, because we believe that at the end of the day, it's the young peace activists, the grassroots organizations who are at the forefront of any sort of crisis. So this is very important that these organizations, these activists, and these actors are actually empowered with not only capacity strengthening, but also with access to resources so that they can capitalize on their potential. They can actually address the issues themselves directly using participatory action planning and mobilization methodology that we call it as PALM. This is one of the strategies that we are using. Just last year, as you may be aware, that in Pakistan, we had the most devastating floods in the history of Pakistan. So more than 33 million people were impacted by the floods. That's almost 1 in every 7 Pakistanis. And as part of our campaign, though our work is around peace building, democracy, human rights, civic education, but as part of the work that Chanan Development Association do, it was important that we address specifically the needs of the people during this crisis, because as you know, that Pakistan is a very diverse country. So we have seen that during this crisis, the most vulnerable get even more marginalized. So that's why it was very important for us to initiate this campaign. So we called One Coin campaign, which was a flood relief drive that we initiated. As part of the campaign, we did three things. One, we distributed daily needs items like ration, foods through the food drives that we did in Punjab, Sindh, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and also some part of Balochistan, more impacted by the floods. As part of the second thing that we did, we also organized some peace building sessions amongst the flood affected young people and children, so that any sort of impact that they had on their mental ability and also their ability to learn could be addressed through this. And third and most important thing is that as part of our longer term rehabilitation plan, we are basically helping strengthen building some houses that are women, supporting some youth-led organizations that are building the houses for women-led households, and also supporting the rehabilitation or structuring of some girls' schools in Balochistan. So this is something that we have done, and we have climate is a bigger issue, so we continue to work on that. As part of the work that Chanan Development Association does, as I mentioned earlier, that we support youth organizations, and we are very fortunate and we are very proud that two of the youth organizations that Chanan Development Association has worked with are with us in this call, and their work is amazing and very inspiring. So we have the privilege of having Ayesha Amin. She's the founder and CEO of Baithak, who's doing amazing work with women and girls in the province of Sindh. And also we have Jayaa, who's the founder and CEO of She Matters, and also the co-founder of Youth Squad, Green Youth Squad. So her work is also very inspiring. So we get the opportunity to listen to them directly from their experiences. So I'll hand over to Ayesha now. Let's hear it from Ayesha, and then of course we'll move to Jayaa. We just want to get their insights, and then at the end, of course, as Michelle mentioned, we'll get the opportunity to have some questions too. So Ayesha, over to you.
Thank you so much for introducing the work we do at Baithak, and all those who are listening. Thank you for tuning in. I hope wherever you are based in the world, you are healthy and safe. And I'm hoping that through this webinar, we'll be able to share some of the work we do in climate crisis in Pakistan. So what I'm going to do is in next 12 to 15 minutes, I'll first share the work we do at Baithak, and then maybe give you some context into the climate vulnerability of Pakistan, and then build upon some of the work that we did during floods in Pakistan last year. And then we will talk a little bit about COP28. So even if you are not from the climate space, you will be able to understand some of the nuances of the work that Baithak does in the climate space. So Baithak was founded in 2018 as an informal group. The word Baithak means gatherings or sittings, where, and it's an Urdu word that's very commonly used in grassroots communities in Pakistan. It means like people coming together, talking about random things from politics to everyday activities. So it started when I returned to Pakistan in 2018, and after my master's, I was very curious to learn more about women's access to their reproductive health and rights. And out of this curiosity, I started doing focus group discussions in grassroots communities in Sindh. Soon these focus group discussions transformed into safe spaces for women, where they would come together, sit, talk, learn, and reflect on issues that affect their health. And they started calling these spaces or focus group discussions Baithaks. And that's how, Baithak started. We saw a gap that women needed these spaces where they could come together, discuss, and reflect on their reproductive health. That's the work we do. We work with girls and women. We work on gender justice in Pakistan in intersecting themes of gender justice, climate justice, and reproductive health. So the communities that we work with are mostly rural communities, and hence are most vulnerable to climate change and climate crisis, because their capacity and ability to adapt to climate change and to cope up with climate crisis is very, very low. Just building on what Shehzad mentioned about the floods in Pakistan in last year. So Pakistan was hit with the worst climate crisis in the country's history. And over the past 2 decades, Pakistan has been among the most vulnerable countries to climate change and climate crisis, which means that we are at an increased risk of climate-induced disasters such as floods, droughts, heat waves, etc. And this is because of our geographical location and a lot of other factors. So Pakistan is in South Asia, but just right next to India and China. And because of our location and some other factors, we are among the the 8th most climate vulnerable country to climate crisis. So last year, when Pakistan was hit with the climate crisis, almost half of the people affected by climate crisis were children and women. And our initial thought was, okay, what are girls and women doing? Because of the floods, a lot of women and girls, a lot of these communities were displaced from their homes, had lost their income sources, had pretty much lost everything that they had. And whenever a crisis hit and whenever there's a situation, our immediate thought is, okay, how are women managing their menstruation? Are they having access to clean water? Are they having access to privacy? Do they have access to reproductive health services? Who's taking care of their safety needs? And we started receiving a lot of calls from the communities that we work with, because a lot of these communities were also displaced, given that these are among the most affected and vulnerable to climate crisis. And especially, as I mentioned, that a lot of these communities are rural communities. They are heavily dependent on agriculture. And since a lot of agricultural land was also wiped out in the floods, they had pretty much lost access to their financial means of coping up with the climate crisis. So we set up an emergency floods response campaign, which we called Dignity for Women in Climate Crisis, or Dignity for Women in Floods. And I and my team spent over 6 months in flood affected areas, in flood camps, visiting each day, having conversations with girls and women to understand what their needs were, how could we support them, providing them menstrual kits, providing them contraception, negotiating with the local authorities to prioritize their needs. And what we witnessed was, I would say, catastrophic, because there was no regard for gender specific needs for girls and women in the climate crisis response. So some of the things that some of the observations that we had is, so I also want to give you some context into the flood camps. So while a lot of people who were displaced had taken shelter into flood camps, still a lot of these flood camps did not have proper wash facilities. That means they did not have toilets, or they did not have gender segregated toilets, did not have clean running water, did not have menstrual supplies, did not have contraceptives, and also did not have proper lighting to ensure safety during the night time. And a lot of these shelters were set up in the peripheries, where or even a lot of these flood camps were set up on roadsides, where girls and women did not have any privacy. So without access to proper wash facilities or without access to menstrual products, women and girls were forced to resort to harmful practices to manage their menstruation. So for example, they did not have disposable pads, but they also did not have cloth. Usually a lot of these women, because the menstrual pads are very, very expensive, they use cloth piece to manage the menstruation. But without access to facilities to properly clean or dry out these clothes, they were forced to resort to using unsanitary cloth pieces, even leaves, ragged cloth to manage their menstruation. And since there weren't enough, there weren't places to wash these clothes, and given the stigma attached to menstruation, in traditional societies, a lot of these women would wait until the night time to go and change the cloth, and then to wash and then dry out this cloth. So they were exposed to an increased risk of infections, UTIs, vaginal infections, and plus again, given that they're in the medical camp setup, either there were no female doctors, or also there wasn't a lot of priority given to infections that women were facing, and given the stigma attached to UTIs and the vaginal infections, they could not even cope up or get access to medicine to treat these. We also saw the cases where women had lost access to contraceptives, were forced into unplanned pregnancies. Again, the burden of which comes on women. We've met women who were young girls who just got their first period. And the experience was very traumatizing for them because they were going through a lot of changes in their body, but at the same time, having to navigate the first period when they were displaced from the safety and from comfort of their home was a very, very traumatic and challenging experience. We also met women who were sexually harassed and abused by their own family members in these flood camps. And what we saw was gender blind climate crisis response and lack of or absence of female officers, female doctors, or lack of regard for the gender specific needs of girls and women. And while as an organization and a grassroots organization, we were providing menstrual kits or lamps for safety or having conversations and counseling the first time menstruators, we felt that our capacity to provide support to women was very, very limited because, we're a grassroots organization. And given the climate vulnerability of Pakistan, we are going to see a lot more climate crisis in the country in future. And when we analyzed the policies, when we analyzed the mechanisms of climate change and climate crisis in Pakistan, we saw that gender was either a very, very vague part in these policies, and women's sexual and reproductive health needs or safety needs were not accounted for. And that's where we started advocating for policy change in the country. So what we did is we conducted these consultations in flood affected areas even after the floods, and we continue doing so. And based on these conversations and based on these insights and narratives, we have developed a toolkit, which is Gender and Climate Toolkit, that advises the government, INGOs, including the UN agencies, NGOs, and grassroots organizations on how they can make their climate change and climate crisis response more gender equitable. Can we skip to the last one? Yeah, these are some pictures, again, pictures from a consultation. This picture is from a meeting with the Deputy Commissioner's Office. The DC office in Jamshoro, in collaboration with UNDP, was establishing a disaster management response to tackle climate-induced disasters. And as you can see, there isn't a single woman except me, that's me in the pink, in the room. And I think that shows the lack of regard for women in these spaces. So everyone invited to the space was from different government offices. And there were only 2 NGOs who were invited to this space, including Baithak. And I and my team member were the only 2 women in the whole space. And no one really talked about menstrual needs or reproductive health needs or evacuation needs of pregnant women, or the safety needs of women. And I think this is the point where we realized how important it is for grassroots-led organizations, especially women-led grassroots organizations, to be in the policy advocacy spaces to ensure that these mechanisms, that these policies, that these systems do account for gender-specific needs of girls and women, not only in climate change interventions, but also in climate crisis response mechanisms. As a result of these consultations, we were able to advise the government and the district DC's office on making the disaster management response more gender equitable. And as a result, they will be providing menstrual kits during their response whenever a climate crisis response hits in future, and also ensuring the provision of additional resources for evacuation of pregnant women and also persons with disabilities. So this was the work that Baithak does in the grassroots and in climate policy advocacy. At COP28, our major focus would be, so if you do not know what is COP28, it is Conference on Parties on Climate Change. Each year, member states, the civil society, INGOs, NGOs convene to discuss climate change policies and climate crisis policies. And this year, for the first time in the history of COP, there will be Health Day, which will, account for the intersection between health and climate, and where the gender-specific health needs of women will be talked about. So, as a grassroots organization that works with girls and women, we'll be presenting our gender and climate toolkit at COP28. We'll be persuading and convincing member states to adopt some of the recommendations in their climate change policies. At the same time, we'll be advocating for more resources for bringing women from grassroots to these policy dialogues and to these important events like COP28. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about our work or about the intersections of gender and climate. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Ayesha. Thank you very much for sharing the great work that you are doing. And we are really proud of, of your efforts. But at the same time, this also, before we listen to Jayaa, it's a very important issue that we also need to address here is that, the kind of response you expect, particularly a country like Pakistan, which is badly impacted by the climate, but the kind of response you expect from the international community, unfortunately, it was a delayed response, and it was a very the scale of the disaster and the response that was provided by the international community was not in any equation. Just to give you an example, that when the entire climate crisis started in Pakistan, the first contributions or the first donation, the commitment that we received, I remember was from USAID, and they committed $100,000 for that. And this is the kind of impact that it had. Like 33 million people were impacted, and the first commitment we had was only $100,000, which is almost negligible in terms of the kind of impact it's creating. So this is why the forum like COP28 and the policies, it's very important to make the international community accountable. Because is the people who are impacted the most, is the activists or the community or grassroots organizations who are trying their best to address whatever minimum resources they have. But at the same time, whenever we talk about the international development aid, unfortunately, the response is not equitable. So we also need to have equitable response. So now let's hear from Jayaa. Jayaa, over to you. And I would like to hear about your work and your amazing thing. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Shehzad and others. Peace, greetings, everyone. Growing up in a society where women are not given space to pursue their career, where women do not have a say in decision making, where women are hardly seen in public spaces, growing up in a society where you see religious discrimination and have seen armed conflict as well. You have two choices: either to cry on your fate and do nothing to change the situation of yourself and your people, or second, take things in your control and make a change. I chose the second option and founded my own youth-led organization with the name She Matters. You can see a card where you can visit our website. And Green Squad, I co-founded this particular youth-led network. These two networks particularly work around social development and welfare of the people. Last year in 2022, when Pakistan was hit by severe floods, where around more than 30 million people were directly impacted, their homes were destructed, a lot of people were internally displaced, we could see how the lives of people have been impacted. Ayesha has thrown a great light on it. I'll probably not go into details, but I will quickly mention how my response was. Even when the first response was there, may I have the next slides? Or maybe I cannot see it on my screen. So when the first response towards the flood was there, I could see that there were no men. Even my team members said that, Jayaa, it would be really hard for you because we probably do not have washrooms over there. For you, it would be really hard to travel over those cities. So it's better you stay at home and just do fundraising. We were at that time fundraising for the activities. We were visiting camps. We were also working on the rehabilitation as well. I was denied to go, but then I realized that there are a lot of women who are being impacted, and then they were not receiving the direct aid because there were no women in those particular people who were there for the assistance. Also, we saw that most of the time there were people who were going with kids, food, and other clothes and accessories for their daily needs. They were going over there, stuck at one point, and the people who were affected, they used to come to that particular meeting point and they could take the stuff, where we saw that women were left behind. I have such a case study where we saw that there was one woman who was a physically challenged woman and she could not come to the meeting point. And just because when I visited to that place, I got to know that for the last few days, she has not been able to eat anything just because there was no male member in her family. And this is how you understand that how climate crisis or any such climatic disaster puts some categories, mostly women and children, into a more vulnerable position, and the impact is not proportionate. We also then realized that okay, we need to make few additional steps to support those women. While we were doing a research, we realized that the average number of children by one woman were around 11 in one of the regions where I was working at that time. That also made us to this point that there is no understanding of contraceptives, and then there is no access to contraceptives at those particular places. We were also told by women that the entire day they are unable to go to the toilets because there are no such particular space. So there is just one mosque where they have to wait for the entire day just so that they can go to that mosque at night. So that was the only toilet they had available. Also, there were very women on those camps, and those camps were all around the streets, the roads, where you could see that traffic was still going on in the second phase. And those women, when I was talking to one of the women, and she said, would you imagine living under an open sky, thinking of you will not be secure even at night, even at day? And this is how we realized that how women, and particularly children, were impacted, and then no particular support for their safety, security, for their health, for their secure reproductive health rights particularly were taken into consideration and account. And then with a lot of advocacy because of the NGOs, particularly led by women, then we realized that, okay, it's important to have hygiene kits. And then, yes, a lot of people who then made sure that they include women into the response, into their teams as well, and then also provide kits. With moving further, we have also seen that flood was not something that just came on its own. There were already some early warnings as well, that we also see that sometimes we are unable to manage the early warning situations. We are unable to plan things. So for example, we have been hearing about heat waves in the entire region, particularly including South Asia as well. And we know that this year, even there were higher heat waves than the usual, resulting in quite a many deaths, more than hundreds. Me and my team members, particularly Green Squad, we have been working around urban forestation where we have planted indigenous native trees. So one thing is that when we talk about heat waves, we realize that probably we are unable to plant native indigenous species. Most of the campaigns that we have been running around, we are seeing that exotic plants are being planted. And also what we did was that we wanted to include young people, school children into our campaigns, and we developed urban forests in one of the cities in one region, and then we moved to other regions as well. These are the few images where we made sure that we develop these forests. We ran entire campaigns around it, and just to make sure that a lot of support or even the financials that were gone into these projects were from our own pockets, being young people, because we really believe in the cause. With this, moving further, while we were developing urban forests, we also realized that most of the time when the exotic plants are grown up or planted by the decision makers, we realized that they were unable to add any benefit to the climate change that were happening, just because they were not countering the heat waves, because those plants were exotic and there was a loss of biodiversity as well as ecosystem. To counter this, we came up with some toolkits for climate activists, as well as the toolkits that have the list of local flora and fauna. So what we have done is we sat down with botanists, with people who work into the climate space, have academic competencies, and then we developed first a toolkit for climate activists, so that whosoever wants to work into the climate space, they have some mentorship, they have some direction, what should be done and what they could improve in their work. Secondly, we also developed a toolkit. This toolkit has a particular guideline of the local flora and fauna and when to plant tree, what kind of trees should be planted, so that they add to the biodiversity. Because we were also seeing that during the last few years, there was a huge loss in the biodiversity as well. May I have the next slide? You could see on our website, if you go on our website, you'll see that there are two particular guidelines that we have developed in the past few months. Now, if we have enough funds, we will be able to have these printed. We will be able to get these into different languages as well, because a lot of people who are into the community, they probably cannot understand the language, and that's how important it is that we mobilize funds to young people and for their activities as well. Just to mention over here, the work we were doing, we believe in working in silos, but we made sure that we have stakeholders, local stakeholders with us. We had meetings with the government, with people who were managing the regions, including cantonment boards, city development authorities, with horticulture authorities, who were actually into the response, because my activity might be over there for one moment or one time, but we want someone to make this a more sustainable effort. Also, we engaged communities with us, where we made sure we asked the communities what exactly their needs are, so that we have to manage those accordingly. Next slide. These are the few images of the stakeholders while we were working with them, and we also proposed them the recommendations based on their activities. With this, we didn't leave our work only on the ground level, but we also used the importance of the social media. Because of the impact of the climate crisis, we realized that climate crisis is not only really impacting the lives of people by dislocating them, but also giving a rise to violence and conflict in the communities as well, where we came to understand that there is an intersectionality of climate in peace building. So you could see a few images. Number one, we ran different consultations with the young people, not only in Pakistan, but across Asia, so that we could understand what are the challenges due to the climate crisis among people, and what are maybe the best practices that we all can learn from each other. We also had few workshops with young peace builders and climate activists in the city. And then we drafted a list of recommendations that we shared with the relevant stakeholders in the government to improve those situations, and we are also pushing for it. Also, you could see these cuts from our Twitter campaign that we ran on the intersectionality, that how climate
I've just lost Jaya's sound.
Yeah, Jayaa, somehow you're not audible.
I think maybe Jaya's lost her connection. So we can see if
Yeah.
she's able to rejoin us, and maybe, oh, she's back.
and I'm here, sorry. Also, we used our traditional media, including radio and television, to advocate for the cause that we believe in. You could see these images from a newspaper that shared some writings of our peace builders, our team members, and the work that we are doing, so that it has more reach. Also, we use the community dialogues. So with media coverage, I will quickly share. So these are the few clips that we shared with media. For example, we used radio. We ran regular radio programs so that we can give more awareness to young people, how they can play their important role into peace building efforts, into improving peace building situations, and also the current climate situations, how we can make some changes in our behaviors to adapt and mitigate the crisis that we are, and what we need to do at a decision-making level to have more inclusive, equitable policies, and also with increased funding. And that should be in a way that resources are allocated more in a more manageable manner, with meaningful youth participation. You could also see a few images in the last picture that I put, that we not only relied on digital media, but we made sure that we are able to reach to the communities and to young people. So we visited some schools, mostly those schools were underprivileged, there is no such conversation going on, and then to far-flung villages and people. So we conduct these regular sessions with those. Mostly these are dialogues where we not only share information with these people, but we also ask them what exactly their challenges and their needs are, so that community does not feel that someone is coming and telling us what to do. Rather, we engage the community into our recommendations, and so that we can say that it's the solution of the people coming from them, so that we can then advocate it. So combining all these efforts, currently we are advocating, number one, with the relevant decision makers for inclusive policies, and to allocate more funds towards peace building efforts by corporates, by decision makers. And secondly, we are doing behavioral changes that obviously is a long-term process, but we are making sure that at least the upcoming generations are more understanding and they have that sensitivity. Also, we believe that people who are living on the ground, they understand the challenges and they understand the solutions as well, but their inclusion is probably sometimes left behind. And that's why we are unable to impact the way, even in the limited resources. Over to you, Vishal.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaya. And before we go to the questions, the one thing that I'd like to highlight here, as we talk about the intersectionality between peace building and the climate, it's important to share that, when these floods impacted the communities, especially the southern Punjab and the North Sindh regions, there's a lot of people who donated a lot of money. There's a lot of contributions from individuals, from organizations, and as part of this campaign, what we have observed is that the fundamentalist elements or the extremist elements from religious organizations actually had more leverage than the civil society actors, because they had the bigger support base. They were able to provide for the basic needs and necessities of the community, of the people. They were the ones who were providing them rescue. And even we see that during this whole flood relief campaigns that different organizations run, we see that organizations like one of the religious political organization, which is very fundamentalist in terms of its ideology, was getting a lot of support. So people, particularly those fundamentalist groups and religious organizations, actually, use this as an opportunity to further their roots in the community, so that they can actually, recruit more people for their own ideologies. So this is one way of them. This is one, observation that we had, and for us, it was very devastating to see that how people, even from those who believe, who are moderate or who are not that fundamentalist, they were giving funds and resources without having any sort of accountability that where these resources will actually be end up using, whether these resources will actually go for the relief activities or will be used for any sort of other fundamental activities.
Yeah.
So these are the few important aspects that's also need to highlight. So over to you, Michelle.
No, thank you for that. That's really interesting insight to get from that as well. And thank you both, Ayesha and Jayaa, for sharing about your work, which is obviously so inspiring. We've had some questions coming in whilst you were speaking, so I wonder if I can ask you a few questions, and then amongst the three of you, if you could kind of collaboratively respond based on your experience. One of the audience questions we have is, how are people reacting to the work you're doing to combat climate change? And I guess that question is asking more broadly, it could be to do with communities that you're engaging with, or policymakers, and that's open to any of you.
Okay, I can start by responding to that question. So since the work that we do at Baithak is around stigmatized topics, so even in climate crisis, I mentioned a lot of our focus was on sexual and reproductive health and rights access for girls and women. The initial response, I remember there was this whole Twitter campaign on during the floods, where a lot of people were questioning organizations that were sending or that were donating menstrual products to women, and then kind of saying that, why don't you also donate shaving kits to men? So just the insensitivity towards the menstrual needs of women and how they were equating it with shaving kits. So initially there was a lot of backlash from people who had no idea what was happening in grassroots communities, people who came from privilege. Clearly, if they had access to Twitter, the assumption is that these were educated people and were not affected by the climate crisis. But and I think that also did cause a lot of harm to the fundraising efforts that we were doing, because a lot of our donors and a lot of our supporters were asking us, oh, okay, do women really need these products? And it's anyways very challenging to raise funds for menstrual products as opposed to other necessities, because of the societal taboo and because of the lack of understanding people have. But I think what happened later on was one of the provincial ministers also came out and say that, women and girls are in dire need of menstrual products. Some of the leading NGOs also started advocating for that. And that really helped in championing the cause. And as a result of that, a lot of grassroots organizations, a lot of NGOs started donating menstrual products or started adding it in their even they started adding it with their ration packages.
Yeah.
And we see that there has been an increase in the understanding and urgency of the menstrual health initiatives because because of that.
Which is really good to hear. Yeah, Shahzad or Jayaa, did you want to come in on that question as well?
Yeah, I just want to say, that it's very difficult for people to understand the impact it has on the marginalized populations. So see, there are people, particularly in a country like Pakistan, which is divided, which has different actors contributing to violent extremism, which is contributing because it's a very diverse country. So social, economic actors, the religious, ethnic, linguistic, all sort of these factors contribute to violence in one way or another. But the problem here is that during the crisis, what happens is that there's a tug of war for having more access to resources. So the groups who are more privileged have more access to resources, and the groups who are already marginalized, they get even more marginalized, especially women and girls, if we talk about, or the religious people from religious minorities. This is what our experience is. So it's very difficult. It was very difficult initially for people to understand the intersectionality between the climate and the peace building. For them, these are two separate thematic areas which work in isolation, and people were not able to relate to it. But then what we have also seen that not only that, but in our experience, when during the communities, when we were supporting the grassroots individuals and organizations, what we have seen is that in the communities people contributed because people but we have also seen that there was hesitation from Muslim majority communities to receive donations and funding coming from religious minority groups, because they think that that this is kind of a stigma associated. Now we are getting resources. Now we're getting support from these religious minority groups. So that has actually contributed to more tension than actually resolving. But what happened was that because this also has provided an opportunity for people, because there was a need. Of course, they had to work together. So this is actually pathways in one way. But for us as an organization, it was very difficult to make the international community understand that there's a big linkages between the peace building and climate, because if we really want to address some of the core issues of violent extremism, then it has to be addressed. The climate issue has to be addressed as a priority, and the intersectionality has to be addressed.
And we have had a few questions as well about kind of getting people to understand the connection and intersection between peace building and climate change. So that's really useful. So thank you, Shahzad. And Jayaa?
Quickly adding to what they both have already responded, since we had been doing sessions around family planning and menstrual health and during the flood and even after, we realized that these are really taboo topics and it's not easy for us to convene. But this is how our understanding of the local context comes in, that how we use the appropriate language, how we deliver our message, even when the message is same, but in a manner that is understood by the community. So every time when I go to the communities, I make sure that I am aware of what kind of language I'm delivering the same kind of message, but the way I'm delivering it is what they want to listen to, but the content it was be what I want to deliver. So this is how only the locals can help. And secondly, quickly, the understanding from the terms from decision makers, sometimes I find it really hard being a young person who is there telling stakeholders or probably decision makers are going to big institutes who are funding and who have been doing a lot and telling them, hey, look, you have been not doing in a right manner, or things could be improved. It's not always easy, because while I was working, I realized that we approached a lot of institutes and most of them were not taking us seriously just because we are young people. But a few of them were really positive as well. But so I would say it's a mixed response. But then again, it takes a lot of time for decision makers to invest in young people, or at least their conscience and their understanding, and take their recommendations in a very such a manner that they could be incorporated at the government or national level.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for mentioning as well about kind of why the local aspect is so crucial. And I think that that was something when I was kind of exploring both of your work ahead of today that I observed. And Baithak have got a fantastic documentary, which we'll link to in the chat as well, about their work with women in floods. And what Jayaa was just touching on about kind of the communication style, but also like dialects, languages are so crucial, especially when you're talking about these like already stigmatized subjects. To be able to trust and confide in local peace builders is so important. So yeah, thank you for raising that. We actually have a follow-up question on this point that Shahzad was making around fundamentalist organizations. And the question's from Pete, and he asks, are there any opportunities that arise from this for your organizations, or potential kind of collaborations with them to try and kind of build bridges or understanding? And also, do younger people kind of fall for this kind of more extremist rhetoric as much as older generations, or what's the kind of dynamic there that you've observed?
See, no, thank you, Pete, for this question. It's a very pertinent question for us as well, because we're living in a country which is having a totally politically polarized country, you know, where the political parties, a lot of debate and discussion happening, particularly among the younger generation who have a different political point of view, and the elder generation, which is a different political point of view. In terms of the collaboration, there's no way that a civil society organization working for peace building is going to collaborate with a fundamentalist organization. So of course, no. But you know, there was what has actually helped us during this whole process is that this has opened up avenues for this has actually you know, contributed to the more credibility of the grassroots organizations, because you know, they were the first ones to respond in the community, despite the fact that we're living in a country in Pakistan where the civil society organization spaces are shrunk, where there's very few resources available for the local and grassroots organizations. So you know, and actually you know, and there's a lot of myths and misconceptions, also propaganda around the NGOs you know, being the agents of West, on you know, how they're manipulating the children. So this crisis has actually built more credibility of frontline grassroots workers and the organizations as compared to the but at the same time, as I mentioned, that there was a risk involved around that, which was the fundraising by the fundamentalist organizations, and it was very difficult at that time to distinguish between the two, that you know, because people needed the basic items at home. They wanted food, they wanted shelter, they wanted other items to be covered, you know. So this was very important. Another thing that you asked, Pete, I can also see that, you know, it has actually a lot of trauma, especially on the kids. The learning sessions, the learning kits that we have distributed, and the sessions that we have engaged with the students, so we have actually you know, tried to address this psychological impact and the trauma healing techniques amongst the young people during especially for those who were out of school suddenly, because it was only these school buildings that were having a better infrastructure which was accommodating people. During the floods, almost their entire homes and everything was destroyed. So the schools were the only places, which means that the students were not able to go to schools, the kids were not able to actually go to schools. So we established with we have actually supported some of the grassroots organizations to strengthen some learning centers, the temporary learning centers in different districts, which has actually helped the students to continue their learning during this crisis. So yeah.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Carolyn, who asks, now that we have the beginnings of a loss and damage fund, how do you think the funds should be distributed?
I think I can start by responding to that. So one of the biggest achievements of COP27, COP from last year, was the establishment of Loss and Damage Fund. And Pakistan was actually one of the biggest campaigners for this, because this happened while the COP was taking place. Pakistan was still recovering from the floods. How it should be used, we see that there's still lack of consensus on how the fund will be established, who will be contributing money, where the money will be going. And this year's COP would be instrumental in deciding and advocating for how the funds should be used. I do know that the money should go in the hands of vulnerable populations, which is grassroots led solutions. And I think this is very, very important that the member states and the NGOs and civil society advocates for a mechanism that channels money and that, puts trust into grassroots led solutions and interventions, because historically we have seen this mechanism where solutions are come from the developed world, then they trickle down into countries and member states, and they have done, and then they implemented into grassroots level, and we have seen that that has done a lot of harm in so many different sectors. And so it's so important to localize those solutions. We definitely need more women in leading these initiatives, and more money like channeled into women-led initiatives at grassroots. And we'll see how that unfolds at COP28. So far, I think countries are still fighting what will happen, which is not something new. Member states always do that.
Yeah, thank you, Ayesha. Jayaa, did you want to comment on this as well in terms of how funds should be distributed?
Yes, I think Ayesha has really comprehensively responded to it, but just quickly adding to it that even the 2022 adaptation gap report indicates that even the international adaptation finance that was flowing to developing countries from development countries is 5 to 10 times below the estimated needs. We probably, like, till 2030, as per the stats, we still need $300 billion per year in the form of this fund. And I'm not sure, even to be honest, though I'm one of the official delegates of the program, but I am still not very hopeful for the loss and damage funds, because even the last year's commitments are still not fulfilled. The consensus has not been built. And also, again, when it would be done, I'm not sure would it be distributed in a way that really meets the needs of the people or not. But then again, obviously, due to these apprehensions, you do not lose hope, and you do not discontinue doing your advocacy. Also, quickly adding to this point, that even then, those developed countries, the G20 countries, are probably adding more to the climate crisis to the developing countries. So into the loss and damage fund, that how the burden, even if, for example, if you give the financial funds, does it really add to the other aspects? Like, can human lives be measured in terms of money? So that's another aspect that comes into the loss and damage fund. The mental health that has gone, the years that have gone, can the loss and damage fund, no matter how much the money is, can it really justify it? And again, the burden on adapting and even rehabilitation comes on the poor people particularly, and the poor, not so good word to use, but on the poorer nations. So I think a lot of these to be taken into account, and then how it would be distributed, probably we would be distributed the way decision makers would decide, I would say. But again, being a young person, we are at least advocated that there should be a proper mechanism with accountability and monitoring, and there should be deadlines where whatsoever they have promised, they should be met within the time. It's not like, okay, we need money today, and then something is coming after years when probably we have already coped with up. So a lot of work to be done around this.
Thank you, Jayaa. And then I hope we can just end with a more kind of helpful, hopeful question of what are you most proud of in your work?
Okay, I can go first. Just before sharing what we are really proud of, just one thing to add here. Regarding the question that was asked about the loss and damage fund. That that last year Pakistan had a conference. There was a Pakistan conference, and a lot of commitments were actually came, but those commitments are still to be materialized. No matter what fund is made, for us, what's the most important is that this is something that we are really proud of is as well. That ultimately is the people, is the communities and the associations, grassroots organizations who are at the forefront of all the risks, whether it's the man-made disasters, whether it's the natural disasters, or whether it's any sort of conflict and violence. Is the activists, is the actors, is the community organizations who are at the forefront of addressing it. So I think what needs to be done, and what we have been doing, and what we're really proud of, is that we continue to support those organizations, those actors, those activists, by building their capacities, by ensuring that they are provided with the equitable resources, they are provided with linkages, and as well as, most importantly, their voices are being amplified. So this is something that Chanan Development Association is really proud of, and we see two of our young partners sitting here, Baithak and She. At the same time, we have 306 youth organizations who we are supporting through our work, and this is one way of supporting our work. This climate and peace building is not a one-time issue; it's a long-term issue that requires a sustainable approach to solutions. And we are very grateful as well for this kind of support that Peace Direct has, for this flexible funding that actually enables those organizations to adapt to this, whatever resources they have, they adapt to their own needs. So this is something that we are really proud of, for building a youth-led civil society movement where the flexible funding is provided, where the organizations can make their own decisions and can, we continue to amplify their voices and issues. So yeah, thank you. Ayesha.
I think we're also very grateful to Chanan for trusting grassroots organizations like us so that we can expand the scope of our work. Something that we're proud of is for bridging that gap between the grassroots, women and girls in grassroots communities and policy advocacy. So for the past 4 years, we've been extensively working with the grassroots communities, girls and women in grassroots communities. And this year, when we were able to bring some of those voices to make a small change in how the disaster management response mechanism functions in the government, I think this is something that we want to continue doing, and this is something that we're proud of, because we know that that would impact a lot more women, a lot more girls in future. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Jayaa, finally.
Probably lots of thanks to Peace Direct and CA for their trust and supporting young people, that we always see that that's still not put more focus on youth-led efforts, centered efforts, and trusting them and giving them the resources. Even when we were talking about the loss and damage fund, and even with other funds, we realized that sometimes the funds are not given to the young people or to the locals who are being impacted, and then they remain concentrated at one single point, and they tell others, given funds to young people, and use it the way you think that you can make an impact in your community that is sustainable, that is what meaningful, and you need it. So thank you for creating the space for generations to come, for giving us probably the space where our voices are heard, where we are given equal space in the decision making, and we are not just the beneficiaries to get something and that's being done by some others. I really appreciate it, to all the attendees and young people who are listening to it. Keep doing whatever you are doing in your spaces. Give more people who are young, who are doing some good work into their communities. And someone even wrote in the chat that it's the power way that we need to work together to make a more sustainable long-term change for all, probably those who do not have it. So thank you, everyone, and hope we are able to see somewhere each other, and really looking forward to these conversations to continue and to not stop, because it's important. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Joe. That's such an inspiring note to end on, and of course, thank you to you, the local peace builders who are actually doing this work. So many thanks go to you for that. So I think now I just wanted to end by kind of wrapping up and pointing to our co-appeal, so this event, as I mentioned at the start, falls as part of our first ever co-appeal, which we are doing with Chanan Development Association in Pakistan. And this is our first time testing an appeal which has been completely co-created by Peace Direct with one of our local peace building partners. All of the content for the appeal has been co-created, co-designed. The themes, the emails are coming from CDA's team. And then today's event, where we've been really lucky to have Ayesha and Jayaa with us to be able to spotlight their work and the support that they've received from CDA, to be able to show Peace Direct supporters and audiences the impact of your support at the grassroots level. And this appeal, all proceeds will be be shared equally between Peace Direct and CDA so that CDA can continue to do this work. And thank you so much to everyone who's already supported this appeal. Please support it if you can, and please share it with your networks as widely as possible, so that we can raise awareness about this grassroots peace building work, and how important it is now and how it links to the climate crisis, as you've heard today. So there is a QR code on screen that hopefully is easy for you to scan if you'd like to be taken to read more about the co-appeal. And I hope that Oscar is also going to now post the link into the chat for all those who wanted to read more about it. We've got a page about the co-appeal on our website, and you can also just search Peace Direct Pakistan appeal, and it should be the first thing that comes up on your screen. And yeah, you know, more than anything, we'd be really happy if you could share that and share what you've heard today. That would be really the most useful thing that you can do for us. So yeah, thank you so much for attending, and of course, most of all, thank you so much to CDA for working with us on this. I know that it's been, you know, a new process for all of us on both sides, and I know that the CDA team are also tuning into this event. So huge thank you to everyone in the team, to Hira, Ayesha, Danish, and of course to Shahzad. And the biggest thanks of all go to Ayesha and Jayaa for giving up your time and your energy to speak to us about your work, which is so inspiring. Jayaa is actually like on a train in between different meetings right now and is still presenting in such an inspiring way. So yeah, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you, not only for joining us, but for doing this work day in, day out. Yeah, and we're truly grateful for what you're doing. And yeah, that's it for today. Thank you all for joining us. And yeah, I hope to see you at future events. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. And there's more details on screen if you'd like to get in touch with us. Thank you, and bye from everyone here.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.